Let's talk about that Ultimo Dragon picture. This was taken after WCW Starrcade 96, when Ultimo Dragon became the most decorated champion in wrestling history, with 10 total belts, a record which still stands today. So I'm doing a deep dive on each one. Everyone likes top 10 lists, right? Well, these are not ranked, but it's a list, and there's 10 things on it. The lineage of these belts is a Gordian knot of convoluted history, because by the 1920s, every territory claimed its own world champion, many of which would lose their belts and still claim to defend them, because nobody could fact-check at the time. So promoters would say,
"Well, hey, you're 10 pounds lighter than this guy, so you're both world champions in different weight classes."
In 1930, the National Boxing Association formed a commission to officially regulate champions and weight divisions, so I'm mostly glossing over any lineage before that. And before you ask, the National Wrestling Association was not the same thing as the National Wrestling Alliance. That formed in 1948 and took over the Boxing Commission's influence throughout the 50s, and it's the NWA most people have heard of. Sorry, the other NWA most people have heard of. I'm also obviously not talking about the modern NWA. All of this happened before Billy Corgan ever disarmed you with a smile. But in the first of many examples of Vince McMahon ruining everything, when the rise of WWF killed all the territory markets in the 80s, promotions rapidly dropped out of the NWA, and many didn't give their belts back. So there are still dozens of unofficial NWA belts all over the world. So I'm using these timeline markers to keep track of each era. Pre-regulation, National Boxing Association regulation, National Wrestling Alliance regulation, the Japan Juniors and J-Crown era around when the picture was taken, and everything after that. The NWA World Middleweight Championship's lineage has roots in the late 1800s, but the first champion recognized by the Boxing Association was Gus Kallio, a wrestler from Finland known as the King of the Middleweights. EMLL was founded in Mexico in 1933 and introduced its own version in 1939 by inviting Kallio and just giving it to him. But he immediately dropped both that and his original one, which was merged into the new one. So bringing in the old belt was just a way of giving the new belt some immediate street cred. EMLL became an NWA territory in 1953 and retroactively recognized the lineage. Quick detour. In the mid-70s, the champion left EMLL with the belt. The next champion also left with the replacement belt. NWA said, "You can't do that," but they both said, "Too bad." So they had a champion versus champion unification match despite neither being champion. NWA eventually sorted this out with a tournament for another new belt. Soon after EMLL withdrew from the NWA in the late 80s, it was renamed CMLL and introduced several new championships, including a CMLL World Middleweight belt. But they ignored requests to return their NWA belts and sold this one to Ultimo Dragon. Ultimo brought it back to Japan, and he hadn't defended it recently by the time of the picture, but he would defend it the following year in his new promotion, Toryumon Mexico, before vacating it due to an arm injury. When he started Toryumon Japan, he booked it in a tournament won by the great Sasuke, who brought it to his promotion, Michinoku Pro. Toryumon's Masaki Mochizuki briefly stole it in 2000 and claimed he won it, but his reign in Toryumon was unofficial. Thanks to Dragon Gate's Jay for that bit of history. When WWE signed Ultimo Dragon in 2003, he had to sever his other ties because by that point WWE had become a proprietary corporation and because Vince never learned how to share. So Ultimo won the belt back from Sasuke and returned it to CMLL, who promoted it for several more years until the new NWA Mexico demanded it back. In 2010, it was finally returned and decommissioned. But since it had history with CMLL, they replaced it with their own unofficial version, the NWA World Historic Middleweight Championship, despite no longer having an affiliation. They continued to promote that version and their own version. Okay, we got through that. The rest should be a breeze, right? Oh no. The NWA World Welterweight Championship follows a similar path. Where the lineage gets muddy is that the Mexican National Welterweight belt was vacated and disappeared 3 weeks before EMLL introduced its own version. When EMLL brought back the Mexican National belt, it just sort of appeared on El Santo, who was also the first World Welterweight champion, so old US publications often confused the two. Under the NWA banner, EMLL promoted it until the 90s, but same story. The renamed CMLL kept using the NWA belt when they left and created their own version. By 1996, the legendary Jushin Thunder Liger came up with the idea for the J-Crown, a winner-takes-all tournament in New Japan for 8 junior belts from all over the world. Negro Casas entered the tournament with the NWA World Welterweight belt, but lost it in the first round. Sasuke would win the tournament and all 8 belts, but Ultimo would later defeat him in WAR for the J-Crown, which is why he had this and 7 more of these. Shortly after the picture, Ultimo was defeated for the J-Crown by Liger. But at some point, Ultimo also got the booking rights for this belt because he made it Toryumon Japan's top championship, and its first champion was his protege, Dragon Kid, who then magically refused to age for the next 20 years. But in 2003, the belt headed over to Toryumon Mexico, replaced in Japan by Ultimo's new Vanity belt. In 2007, La Sombra won the belt and returned it to CMLL. They later gave it back to NWA, but made another unofficial historic version and kept promoting their own version. But unlike the middleweight belt, NWA kept promoting theirs until 2016, when it just sort of disappeared into the Mexican Indies. NWA Mexico also made its own spin-off, which is still occasionally defended on the North American Indies. Okay, hopefully the rest will be a little less. Damn it! There were territory versions of the World Junior Heavyweight Championship as far back as 1926, but the first recognized champion was Albion Britt. Incidentally, he lost it to a guy named, and I'm not making this up, Dude Chick. The NWA created its own version, but it later absorbed the joint lineage of two previous ones from Los Angeles and the Midwest. Heading into the 80s, things got weird. Nelson Royal retired and vacated it, and Steve Cairn won the vacant belt the next night in LA. But while New Japan and a few US territories recognized it, NWA didn't until 1982. They finally legitimized it and renamed it the NWA International Junior Heavyweight Championship, where it became the top junior belt in All Japan. But in 1986, All Japan cut ties with NWA and replaced it with their own version, and then the belt headed back to New Japan. Around the same time that belt branched off, Tiger Mask beat Les Thornton for the official belt and took it back to New Japan, but vacated it the next year when he left the company. So Thornton claimed he won it back in a fake tournament in the Philippines. Both continued being defended until 1985, when New Japan also withdrew from the NWA. So it was abandoned, and the American champion at the time was declared the undisputed one. But by 1987, Nelson Royal had come out of retirement and won the now official US version, which was a different belt from the one he vacated. When he left NWA, he took the belt with him to USA Championship Wrestling, which folded the following year. So he took it to Atlantic Coast Wrestling, which folded the following year. NWA deactivated it in 1989, but revived it in 1995, and Masayoshi Motegi won a tournament for it in Japan. This was most likely the original belt Tiger Mask brought to New Japan, because Motegi wasn't in the US at the time, and I'm pretty sure Nelson Royal never gave his belt back. But Motegi lost it in the first round of the J-Crown tournament to Sasuke, who took it through the rest of the tournament. And as mentioned, a couple months later in WAR, Ultimo beat him for it. After the J-Crown dissolved, this belt traveled from 1999 until 2017 through various North American indies, and a couple more stints in New Japan. There was yet another unofficial branch in Pro Wrestling 01 because they continued to recognize a vacated reign and renamed it the New Wrestling Alliance Championship, despite there being no such thing as the New Wrestling Alliance. Oh hey, Jason Lee. A new official version resurfaced in 2022 in the modern NWA, which is now a single promotion. Incidentally, the international version ended up in Torreon, Mexico. And guess who its last champion was? Okay, that's the last NWA belt. The origins of the UWA World Jr Light Heavyweight Championship are entirely in Mexico. Universal Wrestling Association was a lucha promotion that operated from 1975 to 1995. But ever since its closure, Japanese promoters have loved snapping up their old title belts. The still active ones are all currently in various promotions in Japan, and Ultimo Dragon famously used the UWA World Trios Championships in Torreon. But this belt was first won by Cesar Valentino, and when UWA closed, the final champion Gran Hamada returned to his native Japan with it. The champion at the time of the J-Crown was Shinjiro Otani, who won his first round match but lost it in the semifinals, and then you know how this goes by now. After the dissolution of the J-Crown, Hamada won it back in Michinoku Pro, then later returned it to Mexico where it was defended on the indie circuit. Now, there still had to be a little bit of complexity with this one because apparently you can't just have a non-convoluted belt lineage in lucha. The last official champion was Heavy Metal. But here, I suspect that whoever still owned it was renting it out for a year at a time, because it returned in several unofficial reigns on several different people. It showed up on Silver King, Hysteria, and vacant in a 2013 tournament held by a Mexican indie in California. 2 months later in Washington, Supernova won it, defended it through 2014, and then it was never mentioned again, even though he's still active. So either he was only renting it until the end of 2014, or it's in his personal collection. UWA also introduced the belt that is chronologically next on this list, the WWF Light Heavyweight Championship. But since WWE doesn't officially recognize its own belt before 1997 because it was in a different promotion until then, I'll get to it later. International Wrestling Grand Prix is the governing body that regulates New Japan's title belts, and without a doubt, the IWGP Jr Heavyweight Championship is the most important one on this list. It originally has roots in a belt from Pittsburgh affiliated with the WWF starting in 1965. That belt became the WWF Jr Heavyweight title in the late 70s after it was won by Tatsumi Fujinami. But remember how I said WWE doesn't recognize the light heavyweights early days? Well, weirdly, WWE doesn't recognize this belt at all. It shares some DNA with the NWA equivalent, as several champions defended both belts at the same time, when New Japan had working relationships with both companies. After New Japan severed those ties in 1985, both the WWF and NWA Jr heavyweight belts were vacated, and IWGP introduced its own successor. So rather than the IWGP version being a sibling of another belt, it's more like the secret love child of two star-crossed rivals. The belt was mostly made prominent by Jushin Thunder Liger in the 90s, who held it a record 11 times throughout his career. Sasuke won the belt from Liger and entered the tournament with it, so his IWGP title reign is several months longer than his J-Crown reign. But it's no accident that the J-Crown tournament was held in New Japan and that the champion at the time was booked to win the whole tournament. It's simply always been more prestigious, so the champion was booked strongly. But then, in October that year, as I mentioned, Ultimo lost the J-Crown to Liger in early '97. Liger lost it to El Samurai, who then lost it to Shinjiro Otani. When the J-Crown was dissolved, which I'll get to why in a bit, the IWGP Jr Heavyweight was the only one Otani didn't vacate. Since then, it's been a highlight of major New Japan shows, and has been a stepping stone for many juniors before they bulk up and enter the heavyweight division. The division also gets an annual tournament, the Best of the Super Juniors, where the winners get a junior heavyweight title shot. It's been held by several absolute legends, and is arguably the top junior belt in the world. Similar to the UWA version, the WWA World Jr Light Heavyweight Championship started in a lucha promotion in Mexico. World Wrestling Association formed in Tijuana in 1986 and crowned its first WWA World Light Jr Heavyweight Champion, Rey Mysterio, in 1988. But the company went on hiatus in 1993, and many of its most recognizable talents began working in WCW and overseas. The belt was then defended in FULL, a lucha promotion based in Japan that had a direct working relationship with WWA, where it was won by Gran Hamada. But after that, he didn't start defending it until 1996, a few months before the J-Crown. Hamada brought it into the J-Crown tournament, but lost it in the first round. And you know the rest. The J-Crown was vacated during Otani's reign, and the WWA belt later returned on the Mexican indie circuit. In 2004, WWA resumed operations, with Inferno kicking off a 3-year title reign. That would have been it, but this is a lucha belt we're talking about. A luchador named Fxlecia showed up in Otani's 0-1 with his own version, likely a copy that Otani still owned from his J-Crown reign, and Fxlecia claimed that he had won it in Mexico.
But he really didn't.
Yes, I did.
0-1 sporadically continued promoting it anyway until 2008, when the company underwent a rebranding. And oh boy is 0-1 a whole other vastly complicated story I don't even want to get into. The official belt's later years in WWA were also a little weird because Inferno stopped defending it in 2006, so the company made him drop it at the end of 2007. It was won by Dr. Wagner Jr. in 2008, but he never defended it, so WWA also vacated that title reign 6 years later in 2014 and held a match won by the new champion, Atlantis. But he also hasn't defended it since then, and WWA has since gone dormant again. So this one's current status probably falls into the personal collection category. Finally, the belt that Ultimo Dragon brought into the J-Crown tournament, the WAR International Junior Heavyweight Championship. Wrestle and Romance, later known as Wrestle Association R, was founded by Genichiro Tenryu in 1992 as a successor to his previous project, Super World of Sports. This belt is likely a spiritual successor to the NWA and All Japan belts of the same name, but doesn't share their lineage. It was introduced in a 1995 tournament, which was won by Gedo. After Ultimo beat him for it, he entered it into the J-Crown, but lost to Sasuke in the finals. Ultimo later won the J-Crown from Sasuke, and subsequently lost it to Liger. Finally, here's the first major detail in the J-Crown's dissolution. In June 1997, Liger was still J-Crown champion, but only defended this belt in a match against Yuji Yasuraoka, and shockingly, lost it. This was the first time it really became apparent that the J-Crown wasn't just a single unified championship, and it continued being defended as only 7 belts after that. WAR continued promoting this belt through the rest of the 90s, with its final champion being Masaki Mochizuki before the company folded in 2000. Mochizuki didn't defend the belt after that, signing with Toryumon and later Dragon Gate, and finally dropped it at a WAR reunion in July 2006. But in November 2006 at a Dragon Gate event, he got it back. Then he immediately vacated it. In 2007 in Dragon Gate, he defeated Gedo for the vacant belt to win it back again, then immediately retired it. In 2010, the successor promotion Tenryu Project formed, and the belt was revived yet again. And its first champion was Masaki Mochizuki, who he kept it this time. It changed hands several more times until 2013 when it was vacated by Masao Orihara, and it stayed vacant until it was deactivated when the promotion closed in 2015 when Tenryu retired from the ring. But Tenryu Project has since been revived as of late 2020, and the belt was reactivated yet again in 2021. Apparently this belt just can't stay dead. And neither can this series because we have 3 more belts to go.
It seems to me like you're an expert, Mark.
Well, I try, Tommy, but I'll level with you here. For the last 2 belts, WWE owns all the old WWF and WCW footage, so in the interest of not getting copyright takedowns, you're going to be seeing more still frames than video. But before we get into that, several British Commonwealth belts have been defended all over the world since the 1920s in, you guessed it, British Commonwealth nations, like the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So why was there one in Japan? Well, this is actually really straightforward. Michinoku Pro was founded in 1992, but the British Commonwealth Junior Heavyweight Championship was created in 1995 in England's All-Star Wrestling, specifically to be given to Michinoku Pro to co-promote joint international shows. That's it. That's actually all there was to it. See how easy that is, NWA? Jushin Thunder Liger wanted an M-Pro and brought it into the J-Crown tournament, but he was beaten for it in the first round by Ultimo Dragon. Liger would get his revenge when he was the one who beat Ultimo Dragon for the J-Crown just a few days after the picture. When Otani vacated the J-Crown, the belt returned to England, where it was won by the Dirt Bike Kid. If that name sounds familiar, you probably know him because Sasuke once legitimately kicked the absolute crap out of him for refusing to take a Mask Apuestas match seriously, because masks are very important in wrestling. Tiger Mask eventually brought it back to M-Pro, but was beaten by Masaki Mochizuki, who then brought it to Toryumon, where it became a mid-card title, because Mochi just can't stop taking other promotions' mid-card belts. It went through several other champions before a match at the end of 2003 between Jun and Naruki Doi went to a double DQ, so it was vacated. The following year, when Ultimo Dragon left for WWE, Toryumon Japan became Dragon Gate and introduced all new belts of its own for each of its divisions, and the British Commonwealth belt wasn't seen again after that. Most likely, Sasuke still got it somewhere, unless Mochi stole it again. This is the final J-Crown belt in the list. I mentioned before that the WWF Light Heavyweight Championship was actually created in 1981, and that's its true lineage even if WWE doesn't recognize it because they're a weird corporation. It was originally introduced in UWA in Mexico because WWF actually used to foster working relationships under Vince McMahon Sr., but after he died in 1984, his son systematically started killing off all those relationships and any other competition because he's a weird man. Sasuke took it back to Michinoku Pro because, as I mentioned, Japanese promoters loved grabbing UWA belts, even though this one was technically a WWF belt. Sasuke lost it in M-Pro to El Samurai, who then entered the J-Crown with it, but El Samurai lost it back to Sasuke in the semifinal, and you know the drill by now. But what's funny about this one is that since Ultimo Dragon was working in WCW at the time, that means he brought a WWF title belt on WCW TV. Ultimo says he got a phone call about it, demanding they stop showing that one on camera. After Liger beat Ultimo for the J-Crown, El Samurai was the one to beat Liger for the 7-belt version later on, but then he lost it to Shinjiro Otani. So finally, here's why the J-Crown was dissolved. If you've been paying attention, you might have noticed a theme that Vince McMahon is very petty and doesn't know how to share, and the J-Crown had been highly venerated for the past year. So in November 1997, WWF decided they were going to introduce the light heavyweight belt on TV and demanded Otani give it back. With the WAR belt already gone from it, this would put the J-Crown down to 6 belts. So Otani decided that rather than have it die a slow death, he'd vacate the other 5 and just keep the IWGP, which was the most prestigious one anyway. WWE's revisionist history now recognizes Taka Michinoku as the first WWF Light Heavyweight Champion in 1997 after he won a tournament for it. But they used a different belt and they weren't building off the original lineage, so they really didn't even need the belt back, especially after completely ignoring their junior heavyweight belt in New Japan. But, you know.
It's me, Austin! Oh, son of a bitch!
Even worse, by a year later it was already a joke when they put it on Dwayne Gill under his Gillberg gimmick, a parody of WCW's Goldberg. It was finally somewhat legitimized after 2000 by Dean Malenko, Jerry Lynn, Tajiri, and X-Pac. But after WWF bought out WCW, several title belts were merged. This one technically never got a unification match with WCW's Cruiserweight title because the planned one had to be cancelled due to injury. But when WWF and later WWE introduced their own new Cruiserweight belt, it recognized the lineages of both. And that dovetails nicely into our final belt. The WCW World Cruiserweight Championship has a long and impressive history, but it actually wasn't WCW's first junior belt. From 1991 to 92, they had their own Light Heavyweight Championship, first won by Brian Pillman in a tournament, kicking off a several-month feud with none other than Jushin Thunder Liger. It changed hands a few more times before being deactivated in 1992 after the last champion was injured. A few years later, Shinjiro Otani became the first WCW World Cruiserweight Champion. The division made talents like Chris Jericho, Dean Malenko, Rey Mysterio Jr., Eddie Guerrero, and yes, Ultimo Dragon into major stars on American television. But the belt gained international recognition throughout the late 90s from its very deep division, often outshining the heavyweights, due to the inclusion of many luchadors from working relationships with several lucha promotions in Mexico, and Ultimo Dragon bringing in some of his Japanese talent from Toryumon. The division's popularity was especially impressive in an era of giants, and when much of the promotion's airtime was taken up by the NWO. And here you finally have full context of the picture. Following Ultimo Dragon's J-Crown win, he had a winner-takes-all match against the Cruiserweight champion Dean Malenko at Starrcade on December 29, 1996. Ultimo won the Cruiserweight belt, and along with the J-Crown, plus the NWA World Middleweight belt that he owned, he now had a total of 10 championships at once. But this moment was short-lived. Liger defeated Ultimo for the J-Crown at New Japan's biggest annual event, the January 4th Tokyo Dome show, now known as Wrestle Kingdom. So this 10-belt reign only lasted from December 29th to January 4th. Ultimo would also lose the Cruiserweight belt back to Dean Malenko toward the end of January at Clash of the Champions. Unfortunately, late-era WCW was plagued by awful creative decisions, but by then, WCW was hemorrhaging money, and in 2001, Ted Turner sold it to Vince McMahon. The belt soon became the WWE Cruiserweight Championship after the company was renamed. For some reason, the lineage also retroactively recognized the early 90s WCW Light Heavyweight belt as well. They even took it seriously for a while, giving cruiserweights their own show, Velocity. But you'll quickly notice a pattern here. WWE seemed to get bored with the division as a whole, and in 2007 made their final champion Hornswoggle, a little person with a leprechaun gimmick. Yeah, it was quietly retired after that. They made a new version in 2016 which didn't share any previous lineage, but the story is mostly the same. They gave it another new show, but within a couple years they didn't know what to do with it, eventually folded it into their NXT brand, and absorbed the belt into NXT's mid-card belt. Somehow WWE is still the only promotion who just can't figure out junior wrestlers. Even TNA figured that out. And they were TNA. Now, I would say that I'm done here, but Ultimo Dragon is a crafty one, because there's actually an 11th bonus belt. Shortly into his J-Crown reign, Ultimo also won the WAR 6-man tag team championships with Nobutaka Araya and Genichiro Tenryu. The belts were temporarily retired shortly after, but this means Ultimo Dragon actually had 11 championships at once. So anyone going for the record now technically has to have a full dozen. Well, that was exhausting and exhaustive. The truly insane thing is, this isn't even the deepest dive I could have taken. There are a bunch more previous belts and incidents and confused lineages and vacated reigns that I could have tackled here. But I'm going to spare you and myself the sludge at the bottom of this very deep pool. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, apparently this one is worth over 5,000, and could have been a lot more. Hey, wrestling? Why are you like this?
No.